Good day, Prof, and welcome to Big Talk, hosted by the Citizens Voice Network. I'm sure you're aware of the topic that has seized everybody in the country right now, and even those who are beyond the borders. The 2030 agenda, the possibility of President Emmerson Mnangagwa extending his term beyond 2028, which the Constitution really says he can't go beyond. Would you like to just tell us the stages that whoever is pushing this agenda we have to go through?
Well, I think that first and foremost, I must say that it is very disappointing that at this stage we are talking about that when the president himself has said he would not want to do that. He would not want to have the constitution changed precisely because of him, because that's exactly what's happening. So that is a very disappointing thing. Then when it comes to the procedures...
But maybe before you go there, he has said so, I think, more than 3 times publicly. But do you trust him? Do you trust his words?
I mean, there's no reason not to trust what he has said. That clearly he has said that openly. I'm sure that those who are pushing for him have other agendas. Perhaps they know that he can be persuaded, or that they also want to benefit, which is clear that they are not saying only the president goes beyond his term. But they're saying every member of parliament, every councillor, and so on will also go beyond their term. So the president is being used as a stepping stone by many other people. So for now, we have no reason not to trust what he has said repeatedly.
Now, let's go to the stages.
Yes, when we come to the stages, perhaps there's a mistake, which is that to think that the Constitution provides a clear procedure for those who want to breach its fundamental frameworks. There's no such procedure. So for us to know what stages will be followed, we would have to first be told what is being proposed. At the moment, I do not know what is being proposed. But if we assume that what they want is to have the president serve a 3rd term, he has served 2 terms already, and the Constitution is clear that that is the maximum that ought to be served. If they want to introduce a 3rd term, they'll have to remove the provisions of the Constitution which say that the president shall serve a term of office of not more than 2 terms. So that's what is put in the Constitution. They'll have to amend that provision. Now, to amend that provision is on its own. It would be a normal process, which is to have a bill published, people given 90 days within which to debate it, and then thereafter get to Parliament, get 2/3 majority of both houses. After that, in this case, I want to add there that whether or not you will have a referendum for that provision is not something that is simply determined by the Constitution. Our Constitution sets out certain things that by law you would require a referendum. But in setting those things by law to say you need a referendum, it doesn't mean that those things that are specified by law as requiring a referendum are the only things that require a referendum. I must emphasize that. So many things that are not specified as requiring a referendum would also require a referendum, in the sense that with a constitution, there are always 2 sets of provisions. There are provisions that are of a legal nature, which are legally binding in the sense that you go to a court if they are not followed. But there are so many provisions of a constitution which are morally binding, and these are not written. And one of those rules is that if you want to amend a constitution in a very big way, in a very fundamental way, you must go for a referendum. This unwritten rule is part of our culture, our political culture. When we went for a referendum in 2000, because we wanted to amend the constitution, it was not because there was a constitutional provision that said we had to go to a referendum. When we went to a referendum in 2013, it was not because there was a constitutional provision that said we had to go for a referendum. I hope the public understands that. And as a matter of constitutional law is not just about law. It is about law and other non-legal rules that are politically binding. And this is what I mean by that. So if just to say that you want to move from 2 terms to either 3 or no terms. It's such a fundamental change.
That requires a referendum.
It requires a referendum, politically. So I would insist there that, and I hope they understand, I'm not saying that there's a law that says for that kind of change you need. We have never had a law. No law in 2000, no law in 2013, sorry.
Yeah.
But we went for referendums. The referendums in those cases came from this rule I'm introducing, which I'm not just, I'm saying I'm not dictating it. I'm putting it out there from what we know as constitutional lawyers. So they will need a referendum, even for that. But I've heard so many of them saying, look, to change this term, we don't need a referendum. We only need a referendum when we go to what is said in Section 328. That's outright ignorance. And then I can give you examples of the UK Constitution. Most of the rules in the UK Constitution not written. No rule of law said that if they wanted to move out of Europe, they had to go to a referendum. You know, the famous Brexit.
The Brexit, yes.
But it was common sense. It was the politically common sense that you needed a referendum. So even
so what is the political common sense at the moment?
The political common sense that if you want to change the fundamental rule that a president, you remove the 2 terms that a president must have. Here we're not talking about the President Mnangagwa. We're just talking about that idea of wanting to move from 2 terms to no terms. You need a referendum for that. But I hadn't completed now. If, for example, they were to argue that they didn't need a referendum for that, but I would say they must go for a referendum for that. If they were then to say that they would want the current president, who is President ED, to then benefit from a change of the term limit, then the Constitution says, as a matter of law, you will need to amend Section 328, subsection 7 of the Constitution, which says no person who is an incumbent can benefit from any extension or any term limit or anything. There they will need to amend that provision. That provision would require a referendum for it to be successfully amended. So you need a referendum either way.
So does this mean possibly we might have 2 referendums?
Yeah, we in fact several referendums. In fact, one time
they can be combined into one.
Where you cannot combine them into one is where you want to amend that provision, and then you also to amend other provisions in Section 328. You will have to have 2 separate referendums. They cannot be amended in one. That refers to certain provisions in the Constitution. So clearly, what I'm saying here is that they shouldn't combine the referendum to say we now no longer want term limits. We now want to move them. That I must say and emphasize. It is so important for Zimbabwe. Having moved from the Lancaster House Constitution, which did not have term limits, and then there was a constitutional making process in 2013, which yielded a constitution that removed term limits. And arguably we had, of course, I always have problems with that constitution, but it was a broad-based process which then yielded a constitution with term limits. You can't take away those term limits without going back to the people in a referendum. So I would put across that there ought to be a separate referendum in the first place on whether we want to change term limits before we even go to ED.
Do you see a situation where maybe people would say yes to the extension of term limits but no to the incumbent benefit?
No, I mean, that's not. The people will say no to any issue relating to term limits. I think we shouldn't become too academic and say that now we will have to wait to hear. I think the mood in this country is very clear. We ought to be guided, all of us, by what we know is the sense in the country. The sense in the country is that you can no longer take away term limits. But who else doesn't have term limits? You can tell the kind of people that would have. I think currently you'd have President Putin. I'm not sure what the current situation there is. You also have President Kagame. I'm not sure what he has done. But these are isolated. And so, but everyone else, we are in Mozambique. The person who is actually taking over as president in Mozambique is younger than me. He is a post-independent, born after independence. Under 50, President Chapo, etc. And he's coming in after we've had several people there. You go to Zambia, several people there. You go to Malawi, several people there. You go to South Africa, several people. In Namibia, we know where we are at the moment. Several people. In Botswana, we are No, Zimbabwe in this process where we are, we still want to talk about the language of retaining. We were lucky that at least we had a second president with ED. So we must stick to what the president has said. He no longer wants anything to do with that. Yeah.
But what would you say to people who say, no, these are his people, he is indicating left and then turn right? Because he should have possibly maybe rebuked these people in public and say, no, stop this.
Well, I think that I must be very clear. People want other people to do things for themselves. He has spoken. He has been very clear. And he's spoken 3 times. Now, what do you want him to do? I mean, and there are people that keep... Are we not able to deal with those people ourselves? We should deal with those people, confront those people and say, look, why are you saying these things when the president is... I think that Zimbabweans must get out of this. You want ED again to rebuke his people? I know, I don't agree with that. He has spoken. Let's go by his word. We all heard him saying that. Let's confront the Mtodis and so on that keep circulating things that don't make sense, and other people that I've seen some documents that Energy Mtodi and others have circulated. We know them, we see them. Let's confront them and ask them why they're talking about these things. Let's talk about that. Even at that ZANU-PF conference where Patrick Chinamasa was presenting as a ZANU-PF legal secretary, these things were also done live. We also heard him telling the ZANU-PF conference that that resolution which they passed was dependent on whether the president would accept it or not. That's what he said. And there the president obviously didn't then indicate any change of his position. I would say that we must take responsibility as citizens of the country. He is the president. He has spoken as president. We shouldn't, that's my view, attribute certain people to say these are his friends and so on. We shouldn't do that. Let's deal with the situation. Like as I'm saying, let's sensitize our people to the fact that there can be no day that will come when that so-called third term will come. If we are alert to what our current constitution provides, if we try and tell them that in fact bring it to us, because we want them to publish it. Let's see what happens in the 90-day period where a constitution ought to be debated. You know why that 90-day period is there? This is the 90 days for people to speak out, not just speaking out by word of mouth, to speak out politically, go out in the streets, say to the authorities, you do not want this. Let's have 1 million people in a demonstration, peaceful one, responding during the 90-day period and say, we don't want this nonsense. Let's confront our MPs, because it is the MPs that keep telling us that the people want this. That's what they say. Let's have people in the constituencies organizing themselves and going to their individual MPs and say, we are here to tell you as our MP that we do not want this third term. And that when you go to Parliament, vote against it. I think that as the media people, we can invite you, say we are here in Mount Pleasant. The citizens here in Mount Pleasant look for their Mount Pleasant MP. The media can cover that, and they tell him. I think that's what I would prefer. And
Prof, I want you to maybe touch the final stages. I heard you making those arguments around the processes that they have to go through. Take us to the final stages and also comment or share your thoughts on the implications this will likely to have in terms of how Zimbabwe is seen at the international stage.
Okay, that's fine. I think going to the final stages, let's assume that they go to a referendum. Obviously, if the referendum votes no, that is the end of the matter. They cannot take it up. Right? If the referendum were to vote yes, then of course it has to go to the president for him to sign. But if they do not go with a route that is a referendum, and I'm sure they can always find a way because they don't want to go to the people and get the parliament. If they breach the constitution...
Is it possible to go not to involve people in this amendment?
The law requires them to involve people. But our politicians may actually breach the law. I mean, the law doesn't implement itself. It can be broken when you are seeing that the law is being broken. If you don't do anything about it, those who are breaking it will continue to break it. I mean, so in fact, if Zimbabweans are not clever, you can actually have a bill publicized even less than 90 days. And they'll argue through the media that we don't need 90 days, or give you some funny argument about a 90-day period, go to parliament, and then also tell you that no, it doesn't require a referendum, and so on. You can have things like that, that kind of nonsense. It can come. So in all this debate, you cannot take away the role of the people to defend what they believe is the correct procedure. It is not going to be the way just simply have the experts telling us what the law is. That's why I've been giving so many interviews, but that's merely a starting point. People must know that. So in those finals, if they don't go to a referendum, don't do anything, and they have a bill that they claim has been passed through parliament, it has to go to the president. They will expect the president to respect the constitution and refuse to sign such a thing into law. You see that? There are so many things that if for example they cut corners and so on, then that is where the president's inclination will be tested. Because we know that the president's office is guided by law. So the president is advised by the Attorney General, but not only by the Attorney General. The president is allowed by our law to get other advices and so forth. So there's so many people that he ought to consult in terms of what the law is. So we would expect the president to refuse that kind of thing. But let's say we finally have such a thing, a claim to be our law. It will damage the reputation of the country. Constitutionalism, an issue called constitutionalism, requires that you actually have, among other things, separation of powers, regular elections, term limits, etc. Zimbabwe will stand out there to be a country that doesn't want to become part of the world, because the majority of the people, even around us, they don't get scared when they know that their president's term is coming to an end. Take what happened in like the countries that we can mention. When you get the president is coming to an end, his term has ended. I wanted to give the example of Mozambique. The two past presidents who had to step down because their terms had ended were all regarded as very good people. But when their term came, they would have to say, well, my time has come and I have to step down. And so it will undermine the credibility of the country. It will also affect even investment in this country. If you can play around with the constitution the way some of these people are proposing, then that means you can play around with any other law other than the constitution. The constitution is the most important law. If you play around with it, then clearly you undermine the credibility of the country, even as a destination for business. So we'll continue to have that situation.
Let me hear from you, maybe politically,
Yeah.
as the National Constitutional Assembly.
Yes.
Do you have something in store in any event that this thing continues to gather steam to respond?
Definitely. As NCA, I mean, I'm speaking, of course, you interview me from time to time in my position as an expert, but I don't have another position. The NCA is totally opposed. It has had its reputation as a body that is fighting for a new democratic and people-driven constitution. That's where we came from. And I think that I had someone who phoned me and said, when they heard me comment, and says, yeah, that's the person I know. I mean, trying to claim that they would identify me more with this very clear thing that this is wrong, the constitution approach that this. So you see the NCA again. Why I even indicate the issue of streets? If there's no one else wanting to go to the streets to speak out, we'll speak out in the 90-day period, not by lectures and so on. We'll try and bring out our people, move around peacefully and say, we do not want this thing. That issue I was indicating that we go to MPs. We'll organize people in various constituencies to approach their members of parliament, peacefully show that they are opposed to it.
Let me be blunt, Prof.
Yeah.
You know that some people have said that you don't have numbers. Maybe are you looking for collaborate and partner with others?
Well,
to make sure that you really make an impact.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they talk about numbers when they refer to a vote. But I have millions in terms of this issue. So when we organize as to who would support a third term, there are millions that support. So collaboration is fine, but it's anyone who supports this. We obviously consult others and ask what they want. But I saw some opposition people that have already said that they will support a 2030 thing. So already those...
It's from recently.
Yes, that's fine. I heard that, yeah. So when people talk about numbers, they should not confuse numbers of those that turn out and vote because they have been misled. I think that we did not have the capacity to persuade people that we're a much better alternative. But with time, we'll be able to do that. So those numbers, yes, we still do not have them, and we are working towards getting this is electoral vote number. But numbers as to what is right, what is good for the country, we have millions that will support.
But I want to go back, Prof. This event that happened at Brigade Farm, this is the president's farm. Did you think it was also another opportunity maybe for the president to really say, no, what you're calling for, I'm not going to be available for this?
No, okay, I mean, I'm not changing my position on that. I feel very strongly that it is too much for Zimbabweans to expect the president to keep, he has spoken. Those who went to his farm knew his position. In fact, they were there because they knew his position and sought to persuade him.
What's giving them confidence to continuously call for that?
No, it's self-centeredness. Being self-centered is selfish interest. It's not because the president is supporting. I mean, I don't buy that.
How do we exonerate him?
I mean, it is a mistake to keep wanting to make the president somewhat involved if he has spoken. I think we should become more mature. The president has spoken and he has been very clear. And I think that if he speaks, he will repeat what he has already said. But we can't ask him to go further. We also have, we must share responsibilities. And that people must not live in which is what has affected our politics. Some people don't want to take responsibility. And I would argue that we have a responsibility and he has played his part. And I would refuse to say that there are people that are the president's people. I mean, what do you expect the president to say to an opposition? He said I think he said something like, you must oppose us. And then after making that statement, he was not opposed. So, and then you say, okay, tell the president to tell those people to oppose him. No, I wouldn't. I'm sure you have seen the line I've taken on this issue. And I want to repeat it. Zimbabweans must take responsibility for their destiny. And they must know that the president is not the one who has to solve. Because it is that mentality which will keep this country dominated by one person. I mean, he has said he doesn't want to go for a third term. He has made that very clear. And he has repeated that. And then there are people we think are around him, which is wrong, and the people that we see around him, and then they keep saying these things. No, let's confront those people. That's my position.
We want to close this, Prof.
Yeah.
What's your message to the people of Zimbabwe regarding this possibly presidential term extension?
Yeah, my message to the people of Zimbabwe is for once, let Zimbabweans show that they are people who can stand by certain interests that are important for all of us. To have a limited term of office for a president, for presidents to come and go, is the best thing for our country. It is in the best interest of our country. We took 37 years to have President Mugabe replaced. And we now have a situation where we replace our presidents every 5 or every maximum 10 years. And we must not lose that, whatever it takes. And this is what I appeal to Zimbabweans. For once, let us be counted among others that have worked well in their own other countries.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you.
It was nice speaking to you.
Thank you.